Hello guys, welcome to another video of Kubernetes. In today's video, we are going to discuss about Kubernetes pods. In this video, we'll just discuss theoretically about pods, and in another video, maybe the next video, we'll see the demo. We'll create the pods with kubectl commands and as well as with the YAML manifest file as well. Okay, so let's begin the video. If I explain briefly about Kubernetes pods, this is basically a smallest unit you can create in Kubernetes. If you are deploying your applications in Kubernetes, suppose you have one front-end application or some container or container image, suppose a Docker image, you will create a container out of it and deploy that in Kubernetes. So your container will be deployed inside the pod. They will not be directly deployed into Kubernetes. First, Kubernetes will create a Kubernetes object named pod, and your container will be deployed inside that. Okay. So in the worker nodes, there will be multiple pods, and in one of the pods, your container will be deployed. Okay. So generally we follow one pod into one container, but we can even create multiple containers in a pod. We'll see that in later. Okay. So if we see here, this is my worker node. This is my Kubernetes cluster, and we have two worker nodes here. And in both the worker nodes, we have one pod in each of them. Okay, and inside that we have the container created of the Nginx server. So if you have this Nginx container image and you are running kubectl commands or YAML commands to create the pod, then you will have to provide this image ID in the YAML or even in Kubernetes command. And this Kubernetes kubectl will basically create one pod inside that worker node, and it will create container inside that pod. So this is just simplest explanation of pod. If we see here with Kubernetes, our core goal will be to deploy our application in the form of containers on worker nodes in a KL cluster. Okay. So if we deploy the pod, it will be deployed in worker node, and in those pods we will be deploying the containers. So whatever containers you will deploy, this Kubernetes will create a pod for that, and it will deploy your container inside that. Okay, your containers cannot be directly deployed in Kubernetes. That should be deployed only in pods. Okay, and this is the smallest unit you can create inside a Kubernetes cluster. So here after pod you will be creating replica set. After that you can create deployments, etc. But this is the smallest unit. Kubernetes does not deploy containers directly on the worker nodes like how we already discussed. It deploy the containers within the pod. Container is encapsulated into a Kubernetes object named pod. Okay, a pod is a single instance of an application. A pod is the smallest object that we can create in Kubernetes. Okay, pod generally have one-to-one relationship with containers. So if you have one Docker image, you will be deploying that image inside one pod. Generally, we deploy in most of the cases we deploy one container into one pod. But if you have some requirement to deploy multiple containers in single pod as well, you can do that as well. Okay. To scale up, we create new pod, and to scale down, we delete the pod. So if you have some requirement or if your load is high, then generally we create different pods, and if you have to scale down your application, then we delete some of the pods to scale down your application. Okay, so if this is your cluster and these are worker nodes, you can see there is one container inside one pod, and in worker nodes we can have multiple pods as well, and even in different worker nodes you can have multiple pods, and users will access the pods from here with services which we will discuss later in the video series. Okay, we cannot move multiple containers of same kind in a single pod. If, for example, two Nginx containers in single pod serving same purpose is not recommended. Why? Because if you suppose you are placing your front-end application within a pod and in two containers, right? So if one is down, then if that pod is down, then your application, I mean total application will be down. So suppose your web app and your front end will be down totally. If suppose this is the pod, in these two pod you have your web server hosted. Okay, and in these all the pods you have multiple containers with your Nginx web server or whatever front end you have. If this pod is down and you have suppose two or three containers of same application, or suppose Nginx web front end or any front end application, then if this pod goes down, then your application will go down. So it's recommended to keep your containers in multiple pods. Like there is one this container for front end, then you can use even this container for your front end, so that even if this container goes down or this pod goes down, Kubernetes and your application will be up with this node. Meanwhile, Kubernetes will automatically recreate this pod. Till that time, your this pod will take care of your application. Okay. Generally, we can create multiple containers as well in a pod, but we this is not recommended. Generally, in most of the cases, we don't create multiple containers within a pod. Okay, we can have multiple containers in a single pod provided they are not of same kind. Okay, it's not recommended to deploy the same kind of containers within a pod, because if your single pod is down, your whole application will go down. Okay, so it's always recommended to deploy your application in multiple pods, okay, and multiple containers. There is a helper containers used to pull data required by main container, or you can push data by collecting from main container logs. Okay, this works as a proxy as well. Write static data to HTML files using a helper container and reads using main container. These two, if they have this helper container and one main container, they since they are in same pod, they can communicate easily because they share same network space, and they also share same storage space as well. So suppose you are attaching file share or disk space with your pod, they will be easily accessing the database or pod, or sorry, the Azure file and Azure disk as well. Okay, multi-container pods is a rare use case, and we will try to focus on our core fundamentals in this course. Okay, so generally we'll see how we can create a pod and one of the container inside that. I mean, I'll just will show you how we can create multiple containers as well in that pod, but generally in most of the cases we'll create one container, one pod. Okay, so this is all about pod. If I summarize, then pod is just a unit you can create. You can say the smallest unit you can create inside your Kubernetes cluster in which you can deploy your containers. Okay, so if you have to deploy your containers, you will have to create a pod, and you can deploy your application within that. Okay, in these pods only you can deploy your images. Suppose you have your database image, your front end image, or your front end container, your backend container, your proxy, or different containers if you want to create, or if you have microservices architecture, microservices kind of application, you can deploy different microservices in different pods as well, different containers as well. Okay, and these pods will be connected with services. We'll discuss that in later. So that's it from this video. In tomorrow's video, or we'll see the demo of the pods, how we can create the pods with the Kubernetes command line interface as well as YAML manifest file. Okay, so that's it from this video. We'll meet tomorrow in another video with Kubernetes pod demo. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe my channel. Thanks for watching.